Hello, and welcome to another episode of Movies, They're Pretty Good. I'm your host, Travis Dudding, and today we're going to continue with Season 2, Part 1 of question mark, depends on how far I get into the season. I watched half of it. That is the plan, to do half and half, but if I go way too long, then I'll cut it early, and, we'll see. I'm not going to give you guys a 4-hour episode. Unless you want that, but who knows? I don't even know how many people are actually listening to the whole episode, but yeah, let's get right into it. So season 2, also 1990. It was most of it was taken care of before he went to go work on Wild at Heart, but and then when it kind of gets a little, when the quality drops quite a bit, that's when it's where David's pretty much absent, and it's just Mark Frost and all the pressure from the studio and or the network. So that's I don't think it's any one creative's fault. The What happened, but we'll get into that like as it gets either towards the end of this episode or the next episode. So we'll see. But yeah, season 2 starts out with Cooper. He's been shot. He's on the floor of his hotel room. He got shot. That was the very last shot of the finale of season 1. Was he's in his hotel room, answers the door, gets shot by a masked gunman, or at least we will later find out it's a masked gunman. We don't see shit. All we see is the gun, and then he gets shot, and then credits. But he's basically laying there on the floor, bleeding out, and his door's wide open because he answered the door, got shot, collapsed, and the gunman didn't close the door after they left. But so the old concierge, someone who works at the hotel, comes, super old guy. He comes shuffling in with a platter with a glass of warm milk for him for bed, and just not acknowledging that there is massive amounts of blood on his white shirt. Just like, why are you laying on the floor? And then he Coop had been answering the phone before he got shot, and it's Andy trying to tell him a couple things, but he's like, Agent Cooper, and he's incapacitated. He's on the floor. But yeah, this old guy comes in, sees him on the floor, barely acknowledges that, is no help, sees that the phone is off the hook, hangs it up. That's the concerning thing for him, is that the phone is off the hook, not the guy bleeding on the floor. But so yeah, he goes, hangs that up, lets Cooper know, like, hey, hung it up for you, and then pulls the check out for him to sign. Cooper's like, does this include gratuity? Because he's just like, this guy's not gonna help me, so let me just get past this, and whatever happens. So yeah, he signs the check, and old guy leaves, keeps giving him a thumbs up. Like, he gives him a thumbs up, and then he goes to the door and then gives him another thumbs up. That's it. I think he does like one of these too. But yeah, no help at all. But he disappears, and then the giant appears, and I don't remember if he showed up in season 1 or not. But this is a character that is connected to the Black Lodge, and all of that lore gets stronger as the series goes, because we only barely touched it in season 1. But and I can't remember if he was in there, but this is the giant, played by Carol Struken. I don't know how to exactly correctly pronounce his last name, but he was Lurch in the Barry Sonnenfeld Addams Family movies. He was in Doctor Sleep. He's been in a bunch of stuff. But yeah, he appears in front of Coop on the floor, and he's like, I'm going to tell you 3 things, and you'll see that these come true, and then once you know that they come true, then you'll believe me, something like that. And the 3 things are: there's a man in a smiling bag, The owls are not what they seem, and without chemicals, he points. And so those are the three things, and they'll all come into play over the course of at least this first half of the season, And then he says, like, I'm gonna take your ring, and once all of these things happen, and you see that I'm telling the truth, I'll return the ring to you. So, and he does. He takes Coop's ring, and his ring is missing when other people arrive, and he's like back to reality, but the ring is actually gone. So whatever other dimension stuff's going on is real. There's proof of it, and we know that. It's just a matter of, is he going to convince the regular people that all this shit's going on? But before he disappears, he does say he says something else, but then says that there is a clue at Leo Johnson's house. So he basically, like, hey, once you're better, like, and he does say, like, you will need medical attention. But basically says, hey, once you're back on your feet, go check out Leo's house. There's a clue. So then we cut over to One-Eyed Jack's, where Audrey Horne has infiltrated it, pretending to be, she wants to be one of the call girls that works there. And basically, like, she's trying to get information and, get dirt on her dad, and, because she knows some shady stuff's going on, but she's also young and naive and gets in way over her head, obviously. So she's laying in, she's in the, one of the rooms, and in comes her dad, Ben Horne, and she's like, oh my God, that's my dad. He can't know that I'm here. And obviously, I'm not going to fuck him. So, and, but so yeah, she's like, trying to like hide behind the curtains, and he just thinks that she's like, playing coy and stuff like that, and just thinks it's all like fun and games, and she has like a porcelain mask that she puts over, just like anything she can, and like kind of changes her voice a little bit, doesn't want to tip him off like immediately, even though it probably actually would have been better off for her if he had just found out that she was there, because yeah, we'll get into that in a little bit. So yeah, at some point they find Coop on the floor, get him to a hospital. When he wakes up in the hospital, they're like, yeah, let's fill you in. And then basically, like, Lucy reads off this list of things that has happened while he was, passed out for a couple hours, and she's like, Leo Johnson's been shot. Jacques Renault has been strangled to death. The mill burnt down. Shelley and Pete are Shelley Johnson and Pete Martell are both hospitalized for smoke inhalation because they were at the mill fire. Josie and Catherine are both missing, and Nadine is in a coma from taking a bunch of sleeping pills, and attempted suicide. So then, Coop's just like, well, how long was I out? And they're like, a couple hours, because there's just so much shit happened while he was out. I mean, I guess technically a lot of it happened before he got shot, but yeah, just he's not finding out about it until after he's waking up. But yeah, so basically all the things that happened at the very end of season 1. We know Leo got shot by Hank when he was about to attack Bobby. And we know that Catherine was the one who found Shelley tied up in the mill. She was tied up in the mill by Leo in the hopes that she'd burn, probably, or at least learn a lesson, because he's insane. And we know that that Leland Palmer strangled Jacques Renault because he was under the impression that that's who killed Laura. So all he knew was that, like, hey, we arrested this guy, and he just assumes, like, that's who killed Laura. I'm gonna go kill him. So, yeah, that's what's going on. Just from carried over from last season. And speaking of Leland, he comes downstairs at his house. It's him, his wife Sarah, and I don't know if I even mentioned the cousin Maddie, Laura's cousin Maddie, who is played by Cheryl Lee, same actress, just with black hair instead of blonde hair. So she's there. She was there for the funeral, obviously, and so yeah, she's staying with them. Leland comes downstairs. His hair is completely white now. And everyone's like, what happened to your hair? Like, what's going on? And he's just like happy as can be. He's singing, he's dancing around, like all this shit. So he decides, like, because he's feeling great, because he just murdered somebody, that, not that Jacques didn't deserve it, but, you know, but so yeah, he's feeling good. He goes to work at the Great Northern, because he's Ben Horn's lawyer. But we just haven't seen him do his job other than like the first few minutes of season one. And it's only actually been a few days. Like, I forget that how compressed the timeline is in seasons 1 and 2. Like, that it's just hella quick. So much shit happens, and it's just all like, a month, a total probably. But yeah, he goes into work and he's singing and dancing, and then Ben and Jerry are there. They're talking and they're kind of like, what are we gonna do? And then just kind of join him in the singing and dancing and stuff. Ben gets on the desk and does the gritty, which is 30 years before that was like actually a thing. But then, they're just like, all right, are you back? What's going on? Why is your hair white? All this stuff. And, he doesn't have any answers. But cut to Leo's house where they're investigating. Luckily, they don't need a warrant because he was shot there. So it is an active crime scene. So they're there. At some point, Agent Rosenfeld comes up, Miguel Ferrar's character. He shows up with another FBI agent, and Andy goes to run to tell everyone that he's there, steps on a plank, comes up, hits him in the head. Very cartoonish way to get hurt. And so yeah, he's there like, wobbling and stuff, like after he just got hit in the head for way too long. But, it's David Lynch, so you don't mind. And so yeah, he's there like wobbling about with a bloody nose, and then they realize that he uncovered some evidence. So there's some boots hidden under there along with a bunch of cocaine. So, and I think money too, but I mean, it doesn't really matter. There's evidence in there. So then we cut to Donna, who has received a note telling her to look into Meals on Wheels, and that's all it says. Meanwhile, we get the one-armed man showing up to the police station. Lucy's there, asks like what you're doing, and he's like, well, I'm here to sell Harry Truman some shoes. And, very, very vague answer, obviously. Then in the back, in one of the rooms of the sheriff's station, they're listening to the tape that James, Donna, and Maddie stole from Dr. Jacoby. Another thing I probably skipped over. I definitely realized that I missed a lot of shit from season one, so that this time I actually took notes, which is why this might go longer than I'm expecting. But, bear with me. James, Donna, and Maddie shot a video of Maddie pretending to be Laura. She's in a blonde wig. She's, calls him on the phone, all this stuff. They basically trick Dr. Jacoby into leaving his apartment. And while he's gone, they're going to break in and look for evidence, rather than trusting it to the FBI and the police. They're going to do it themselves. So they're listening to that. It's James is in there with them because, he's just like, hey, I got this. I know, I know the way I got it. He's saying that he's like, I don't know. We showed up and knocked on the door. No one answered, and the door was open, so we went inside. No one's believing that. And so they're listening to that tape. It's Laura's voice, and she's talking to Dr. Jacoby. She's kind of being like a little cryptic on stuff. Says something about being nervous about meeting Jay. Well, no, that was in her diary. That was way back. But then James kind of fills them in on some stuff that happened. the night that she died, because he was one of the last people to see her. One of the last I think the last non-bad guy to see her. And then basically kind of filling them in on like, hey, this is what she said that night that kind of ties into what she says on the tape. She says at some point she did the full poem with the Fire Walk with Me, and then she says at some point, like, would you like to play with fire, little boy? Would you like to play with Bob? And then she screams and runs away, And we'll actually see that happen in Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, the movie. But, we this is when we first find out about this. And, most of these things are going to come into play a little more coming down the road. We cut back to the hospital, and Bobby's there visiting Shelley because they're secret lovers. This is the first time that they exchange "I love yous" with each other. I almost said first time twice. Also at the hospital is Big Ed visiting his wife Nadine, who just tried to commit suicide. She's in a coma, as mentioned earlier. He starts telling Coop. Because they're there as well, and he starts telling them the story of how they met, how they were high school sweethearts. No, I mean, I'm messing it up. How him and Norma were high school sweethearts, and they had been dating for like most of high school. Till one day she randomly went off for the weekend with Hank. Who was also in their grade, I guess, or in their class. And so he was upset, and then he went with Nadine somewhere, and they had a weekend together, kind of like because he knew that she liked him, but, they were only kind of acquaintances. But basically he felt hurt, and then he kind of rebounded, and he rebounded a little too far. Ends up married and everything with Nadine, only to find out that Norma and Hank didn't even sleep with each other, and it was kind of more of a misunderstanding than anything. I mean, she still went somewhere with them. We just don't know if if that was consensual, or what, because obviously Hank was in prison, and not that necessarily guarantees that you're a bad person. But we also have seen Hank do bad shit, so we know he's a bad guy. So yeah, that's how everyone got in the relationship that they are in, and why Ed and Norma still have feelings for each other. Because basically, wrong place, wrong time, and, that type of thing. Which will continue for quite a while, you'll see. But once Coop and Ed are done having their conversation, Coop gets up and goes, like, kind of walks near, like, a bathroom and sees the smiling bag. And it is the body bag that Jacques Renault was in. And it is the way it is, like, hanging, because it probably got, like, rinsed out, which I don't know why they would have that in, like, the bathroom that's, like, accessible to the people just, like, walking down the hallway. But there's the body bag, and the way it's hanging, it looks like a smile, because it's like the top is straight, and then the open part is open like a mouth, like a smiling mouth. So that's the first thing that the giant said was, something about the man in the smiling bag, and he knows that it was Jacques Renault. So that's the first piece of the puzzle. We then see Norma show up at the hospital to visit with Shelley, because they work together, and she's like, I'm gonna bring you some pies, because I know that the hospital food's terrible. So just stuff like that, just a nice sweet moment and everything. And then as she's leaving, she walks by the room where Nadine is and sees Ed, like, obviously looking very worried, and holding Nadine's hand and everything. And so she has some feelings about that. It's fine to whatever she's feeling is valid. It's understandable to be a little upset with it, but also understanding of the situation, how it's a little different than it's been before. This is a new wrinkle that wasn't in play before. And then, so she goes back to work at the Double R. Hank's there. He's been, holding it down while she was gone at the hospital, asks how Shelly's doing, all, different things like that. And then Bobby is in there, and he's alone at the bar. And then his dad notices that he's there, Major Briggs, and says, "Son, would you like to come have a piece of pie with me?" That type of thing. Just like kind of welcomes him over. And then the Major tells him this like long dream that he had. And it gets, it's very emotional. It's about how he's proud of his son, all this stuff. And Bobby's not expecting that. He starts crying, I'm crying as the viewer. And it's just a very like touching story. And it's like a lot of the details don't really matter. It's just like the general feeling that it has. So then we see Pete's getting back to his place. Sheriff Truman brought him there, gave him a ride, letting him get like settled back, making sure he's like comfortable and settled in and everything. This is when we find out that Josie went to Seattle. So Pete knows this. She didn't let Harry know, even though they're, together, supposedly. But she let Pete know, hey, I'm in Seattle. And, and Pete's like, oh, I think she just likes to go out there to go shopping because she always comes back with a bunch of like nice clothes and stuff like that. Which we'll later learn is just basically, an alibi for her doing some shady stuff that, will come more apparent as the show goes on. And then this is also when Harry lets him know that they have not found Catherine's body or her alive either, so she's missing, still missing, and likely dead at this point. And so Pete's a little emotional, and he's just like, we obviously didn't always get along, but there was love there, so he's obviously rightfully emotional. Also in this episode, we learn that, which we might have known, but it's confirmed that Hank is working for the Horns at that, and Josie was involved. So all of this, like the mill catching on fire, all that stuff was a major ruse to get the mill away from Catherine, maybe kill her, maybe not, stuff like that. So it's all this shit was happening, and but some people messed it up. Like Leo wasn't supposed to put Shelley in there before he set it on fire. So everything, didn't go according to plan, obviously. Cut back to One-Eyed Jacks, where Audrey is getting reprimanded for, not sleeping with the boss, which was her dad, but no one else knows that. But, so she's like, because she's like, what, like, why didn't you do it? And she's like, he wasn't really my type. And Blackie, the one, basically the manager, Ben's the owner, but she's the one that's running shit while everyone else is gone. But she says, like, honey, if you're working for me, everyone's your type, and I don't want to hear anything like this happening again, or, basically there's going to be major consequences, very threatening, and Audrey gets that much, so then we cut to the I'm guessing it's Donna's house. But first we see, so then we cut to the Hayward house, where Donna makes a phone call to Norma saying, hey, I want to do Meals on Wheels, and I'll take Laura's old route, basically. And like, all right, yeah, just come by tomorrow and all that. So she's going to do that. And then they're having a dinner with the Palmers. And, so it's the two families there together. Gersten, one of the younger sisters, I think the youngest. And then Harriet is the middle sister, which who we saw in one scene in season 1. And then Donna's the oldest, obviously. So the two younger sisters want to do a little performance, basically. Harriet wrote a poem about Laura, and then Gersten's going to do a little piano recital, basically. I don't know the actress playing Harriet, but Gersten is played by Alicia Witt, who was the the little sister in Dune, and she'll come back in The Return later, all grown up, obviously, and a very different type of character arc for her in The Return. And then, as I mentioned in the Dune episode, she was also in Long Legs recently, and she's been in like Walking Dead and a couple other things too. But those are the things I know her from. But yeah, so they do their little performance. Leland and Sarah are touched by it, obviously, and everyone's like a little emotional. And Leland says that he's gonna sing, and so he sings like, "Sing Hallelujah, come on, get happy." He's doing that, but then he starts doing it faster and faster, and then like basically breaks down, and I think he passes out almost. He at least like faints, and then recovers pretty quick. And then Donna's dad's a doctor, so that's the right house to faint in, obviously. We cut back to Audrey at One-Eyed Jack's, and she's in her room, and she's visibly upset, and she's basically praying for Cooper, I guess, because she keeps saying special agent. I saw you on the TV. All this stuff. Like, I know you were here. I saw you in your tuxedo. Like, are you going to come save me? All this stuff. Kind of just like putting it out into the universe, and hopefully everything works out. Cut to Cooper in his room. The giant comes back and tells him that he forgot something, but I forget. It doesn't seem like much happens this time. He tells him one thing, disappears again. Then we cut back to the hospital, and Ronette Pulaski, who was the other girl that they know was with Laura the night she died, like at the event of her getting killed. But she's been in a coma this whole time, like basically been in shock. But yeah, it's all the same evidence that she had sex with the same men with the same DNA as Laura, so it's all, they know that she was involved, but she's been in a coma. She wakes up. She's having like flashbacks to Laura being killed by Bob. And Bob is someone we've only seen in visions so far, including this one. And that stuff will be more clear as it goes on. And then I think that's where that episode ends. And then we get to the next one, presumably the next morning. Albert Rosenfeld is having breakfast with Cooper at the Great Northern, kind of filling him in on stuff, saying like, hey, this, we ran these tests, and all that stuff. But then also says that like, hey, just so you know, we've been getting some like stuff, some weird messages and things like that, and we think that your old partner Wyndham Earle might be re-emerging, because apparently something happened between them back in the day. He lost his mind and then disappeared. Then we cut to Donna on her first day with Meals on Wheels. She goes to the home of Mrs. Tremond, and then she's there with her grandson, who's just like kind of sitting in the corner in the like the cuck chair, but in like a bedroom. But he's just like sitting in the corner watching. He's got his hands folded. It is David Lynch's son, and it is not hard to tell. He looks exactly like just like a kid version of David Lynch. But then there's a part where she's like, "Do you see creamed corn on that plate?" And then, you look down, there's creamed corn on the plate. And she said, "I specifically asked for no creamed corn." But then Donna's like, "Oh, sorry about that. I didn't make the meal." But then they look back down, no creamed corn, and like completely clean. And then pan over to the grandson, who's got creamed corn in his hands, And then they're like, "Oh, my grandson, he's been practicing magician, tricks and stuff like that." But, this is, a little more advanced than that. So, weird experience, weird first day for her, obviously. And then she goes to leave, and as she's walking out, she sees like kind of the curtains in another house move. and we see Mr. Smith like peeking out. And Mrs. Tremond does like mention like, hey, you might want to go talk to Mr. Smith. He was Laura's friend. So she does go over, knock on the door, no answer. And then as she's leaving, then she sees him peek out the window. But, still doesn't get anything from him that time. So we cut back to the hospital where Ronette is now awake, and they have some police sketches that they want to show her. And they purposefully show her who they know, just a random guy first. And she's like, takes her a little bit to like kind of notice and everything and adjust her sight, everything. So it takes her a bit to like really focus on it, and then she's like, no, that's not him. And then they show her the sketch of Bob, and she immediately starts freaking out, and she keeps screaming the word train like over and over again. So and then they're like, they know shit went down at a train car, so they're trying to ask her questions, but she's still a little too out of it, and just it keeps train over and over again. Cut to the double R, and we see the log lady is sitting at the bar next to Major Briggs. She turns to him, asks him about like his ribbons and medals and stuff like that, and then says like, hey, you met my log? And can you hear what he's saying? And they're like, and Major Briggs is like, no, I can't. He's very like not making it seem as though this is a weird thing at all, but he's playing along very well. But she says, the log says, deliver the message. And do you know what that means? And he's like, yes, ma'am, I believe I do. Then at the sheriff's station, we see Andy confronting Lucy, because I don't know if I mentioned it, but we found out that she's pregnant in the finale of season 1. So he's talking to her about why, like, hey, this is why I kind of freaked out when you told me that you're pregnant, because I was told by the doctor that I was sterile. He's like, I went to go do sperm donation because I forget, like, he gives 2 reasons, and one of them is something about loving whales. So, but then says like, hey, I tried to do this, and they said like my sperm count was too low, and that I was basically sterile, which at first I thought meant I didn't have to take a bath, but then I found out that it meant like I can't have kids. So the reason I kind of acted weird is because you told me you were pregnant, and as far as I know, I'm sterile. So how would that happen? And then, so this is where, but she doesn't come right out and say it, because she knows now that she's kind of in the wrong, and then, kind of walks off. So, the awkwardness continues between them. So it's now been like, 2 days, and now Ben's like, hey, by the way, Audrey's missing, calls it in. And but he doesn't seem too worried about it, because he does say that, hey, this has happened before. She'll run away from home, she'll come back, all this stuff. She's like just doing it for attention. We know that that's not the case this time, but so he reports that. Then at some point, yes, Leland's at work, and he sees the wanted poster for Bob. And when he sees that, he's like, I know that man. And they're like, what are you talking about? And he said, like, when I would go to my grandparents' house on the lake, I think Pearl Lakes is what they said. But we would go there in the summer when I was a kid, and one of the neighbors was this guy in the picture, and he had this like long hair and stuff, and looked just like that, was like very off and stuff like that, very sinister or something like that. But yeah, so Leland recognizes him, and then he'll add more detail to that in a little bit. So then we also cut to the hospital room where Leo is being kept, and this is where we find out that he's basically a vegetable at this point. And so Doc Hayward's telling Shelley, like, hey, this is what's going on, and I know it's, probably hard and all this stuff. And I think everyone kind of knows that Leo was an abusive asshole, but, no one really wants to talk about that part. Back at One-Eyed Jack's, Audrey goes into a room where there's a guy being taken care of in there. She's like, hey, I'm gonna, tells one of the other girls, like, hey, I'll take the stuff in. And she's like, you don't want to deal with this guy. And she's like, no, like, it's, I do. Like, please let me go in there. She goes in there. There's a guy tied up on like a chaise lounge, kind of upside down. He's got his wrists like bound like that, and his feet up on like the back of the lounge. And I think those are tied up, and I think his toenails are painted. Yeah, all that stuff. And then there's another girl over there vacuuming. So this is some like very specific fetish stuff for this guy. And so Audrey goes in there, kind of lets the other girl with the vacuum know, like, hey, like, you get out of here. Like, I'm gonna, this is my job now. So she kicks the other girl out and then turns the vacuum off. And he's like, what's going on? Like, why is the vacuum off? Starts getting upset. She pulls his blindfold off and says, like, and he knows who she is, because this guy was the one that she kind of blackmailed into hiring her to go to One-Eyed Jack's, basically. And because he's the guy that works he works at the department store, which is basically like the recruiting for sex work at One-Eyed Jack's. But yeah, so she basically is like, hey, I'm going to blackmail you because I'm going to tell my dad who brought me here, all this stuff, basically like, you're going to be a dead man if you don't give me what I want. And so he tells the truth, like, your dad's the owner. Laura Palmer worked here, her and Ronette both came, and Laura was kicked out like after like a day or a week or something like that, for, I forget what the reason he gave, if he even gave one. But so then she knows the truth that, like, yep, I recruited Laura, she came here, she got fired, and and your dad's the owner. So she gets what she wants. She even says so much. She's like, I'm Audrey Horton, I get what I want. Then we see Bobby talking to Shelley about, like, they're talking about how Leo's a vegetable and all this stuff. And they're like, and Bobby comes up with this scheme basically to use like disability money, basically. So, in like life insurance, disability, like all that stuff. So they're going to be like, hey, since he, if he doesn't go to prison, then he can collect disability. And so if you don't testify or, make a report against him or anything like that, then he'll come home, be a vegetable, and you get to collect $5,000 from like disability from the state or whatever. So she's hesitant about it, but then is basically like, hey, we're going to be rich and, we get to do whatever we want, that type of thing. Not thinking about the fact that there's going to be a guy that needs to be taken care of there, whether they want to or not, or whether he deserves it or not. There's still like a human being that needs to be alive in order to cash this money in. So then Major Briggs comes to visit Cooper in his hotel room and says, like, hey, there's something I got to tell you. I can't tell you everything about what I do at work. But I will tell you that there is a thing that we're doing where we're like both sending and receiving messages from like deep space, basically. And it's usually gibberish and nonsense and everything like that. But out of nowhere, randomly, we get this. And then he points at on the page, because there's like, he's got the printout of what's coming through, and it says, the owls are not what they seem. And then, and he's like, wait, like, well, first of all, this is one of the things that the Giant said. So Coop's already like, whoa, wait, when did this happen? And he gives him the time, and he's like, that's right when I got shot. So, like, what's going on? And then he's like, but what, why are you sending, but he's like, that's crazy, but why are you showing me this? And he's like, well, because a little bit further down, it says Cooper. So then, yeah, he's like, all right, well, this is why I'm showing you. I don't know what it means, but obviously you were meant to see this. So, and this is the message that the log wanted him to deliver. So, it's all connected. So now we come to one of my favorite scenes, and it's a favorite for a number of reasons. It does make me laugh for, unexplained reasons. I think it's just so, I don't know. I think everything about it is so interesting and weird and funny. But this is where it is James, Donna, and Maddie in a living room. I think at the Palmer house. So they're there. They got a microphone or maybe two microphones, and James has his guitar. And there's something about the way he's sitting, because he's got his butt in the chair, but then he's also like got one, like he's kneeling, but also sitting at the same time. And, it's weird. And you know, it's crazy to look at. I think I'm going to put that as one of the Instagram posts or one of the slides for the Instagram posts, like promoting this episode. But, so he's doing that while he's playing guitar. And so he's got a microphone, and then Donna and Maddie are sharing a microphone while they're like sitting on the floor, you know, kind of together. And he's singing a James Hurley original, Just You and I. And that's literally like the words, like, I'm not going to do it because the voice goes too high and I know my voice is going to crack and I don't want that. But yeah, he's singing like, it's like just you and I together forever. And then repeat. But yeah, what's so funny, like what's so interesting about this song, and this is like a very mild spoiler for The Return. So like 17 years later, wait, right? No, 27 years later. Sorry, my math is all over the place. So in the Return, 27 years later, there's a scene with James where he sings the same song at the Roadhouse, like as one of the performers. And for some reason, him singing it in season 1 or season 2, I'm like dying laughing. You know, it makes me giggle. Like if I'm in the right mood, I'll like be in tears laughing from it. I don't know why. I don't think it's like really that funny, but you know, it it is to me for some reason. When he does it in The Return, I'm crying just from like emotion, and I don't know why. Because it's not like he got better. You know, I don't know, something about it in there. And then there's also like a part where Shelly's there and someone's like, isn't that James? Isn't that like weird guy? And she's like, no, James is cool. James has always been cool. So it's that series of events and like all of those things coming together. And I think with knowing that it's this many years later and all these people are together again, something about that makes it like super emotional, where now in season 2, it's just so funny for some reason. I don't know. And I know I'm not alone because I see hella memes about this all the time. But yeah, so it's this scene, they're singing the song. Donna's like staring lovingly at James, but then James is kind of more looking at Maddie than he is Donna, and she's clocking this, and Maddie's getting the gaze too, and she's liking it, you know, because she's new to this now. She doesn't like know the history between them or anything like that, so she's just like, hey, this guy thinks I'm cute and I kind of think he's cute, and you know, this is a romantic vibe and I'm digging it. So Donna storms out like after a certain point, and then James like immediately follows, and then Maddie is just like awkwardly sitting on the floor just like, what do I do? You know. So James follows her out, and then they're kind of talking, and then Donna's like just overcome and just like kisses him and just like, you know, kind of just like I don't know what that was, but I love you, and you know, we're meant to be together, you know, that type of thing. She gets a phone call from Harold, and he was the neighbor of the woman and, you know, one of the Meals on Wheels people, and he's like, hey, you know, I want to start getting the meals again, so come by, you know, and we can talk about Laura, that type of thing. While all that's going on in the other room and Maddie is alone in the living room, she notice she has a vision or something, and here comes Bob in slow motion into the dining room, and then like creepily like climbs over the couch and towards her and everything, and obviously she freaks the fuck out and starts screaming, and they rush in and they're like, what's going on, and she's just like crying and everything. And I think she like tells them what's going on and everything, but and I think she also knows that this is, that's the thing. I don't know. I don't remember if her and her Aunt Sarah have talked about that, this vision that they've both now had of the same guy, and who now has wanted posters around town of him. Back at the hospital, Ronette is like freaking out, and she's like thrashing around on the hospital bed. Apparently she pulled her IV out and is just like, they can't calm her down. They got to do like a sedative and like all this stuff. They notice that something's weird with her finger, like it's, been injured or something, So they check under her fingernail, and sure enough, there's one of the little tiny letters, like a single letter under her fingernail, which was the same for Laura when they found her body, and the same for Teresa Banks. And they only kind of really mentioned Teresa Banks. The only thing they know is that, like, hey, she died a year prior to Laura in a very similar way. And there's a lot of evidence indicating that it's the same guy that did both these murders and Ronette's attempted murder. So Donna does go over to Harold's house for Meals on Wheels. They get to talking. She's like, why'd you call me? And he says, well, Laura said, Laura talked about you all the time. And she said, if anything ever happened to her, for me to get in contact with you. And this is just, it just took me a little bit to do it. You also find out that he's basically agoraphobic. Like, he will not go outside. Like, he can't handle it. And, this is 30 years before the COVID pandemic, so he's way ahead of his time. And so, yeah, they get to talking and like kind of bonding a little bit. And back at the sheriff's station, Albert comes in, gives his findings, tells about the letter, and yeah, it's like, yes, it's from the same magazine, Flesh World. So, it all seems to be connected. And at some point, the killer must have come in and put that under her fingernail, which is what made her freak out, and all this stuff. So he's there, and just no one saw him. So, but then Albert all the time is just making all these jokes about them being in a small town and just like insulting their intelligence, all this stuff. And then Harry finally has had enough, and he's just like snaps at him like, I've had just about enough of this, and gets in his face. And Albert basically was like, there's, I've been through a lot, and I've seen all this stuff, and the one thing I know for sure is that the greatest force in the world is love. It's like, I love you, Sheriff Truman, and then he leaves. So I think he's just kind of an asshole as his personality, but he really does like these people, even though he like talks shit to them and stuff like that. That's just his personality, and maybe he's like kind of projecting and all that stuff, but deep down, he does care about these people, even though he's making fun of them all the time. So now this is the first time we get to see Dick Tremaine, or Richard Tremaine, depending on which scene, he goes by both. But so he's like this like fancy guy that works in men's fashion at Horne's department store. And he is the guy that Lucy started seeing when they kind of broke off with Andy. So basically she started to notice things like were weird with Andy, because he's a weird guy. But so they kind of stopped seeing each other for a little bit, and then during that time she started to see Dick. So it's very possible, because of the time frame, that it's especially if Andy is sterile, that Dick is the father. So they're gonna go on this lunch date, basically. I guess not really a date, because they go Dutch, but this is where she admits to him that she's pregnant. So, and then I don't remember if it's at the sheriff's station or somewhere else, but at some point Leland gets in contact with Harry and Coop and says like, hey, I saw the posters. I know this guy, and kind of fills them in like that it was at the grandpa's house and stuff like that. And they're like, do you remember anything else? And it's like, he used to flick matches. And they're like, what? It's like, yeah, he used to like light a match and flick it at, like, say like, you want to play with fire, little boy, which we know is the same thing that Laura said to James the night she died. So, it's all coming together. Then at the Double R, where Lucy and Dick are having their lunch, and things are happening there. Also, at another booth is James and Maddie, and at some point they start holding hands during their conversation, which of course is when Donna comes in, and of course she like, of course she gets upset, and James is like, and she's like, you know what, it's fine, if you want to be with other girls, like, then I can hang out with other guys, and basically tries to make him jealous about talking to Harold, even though nothing's happened between them at this point. Back at One-Eyed Jack's, oh yeah, I think I completely missed earlier. So Audrey does call Cooper from One-Eyed Jack's, and she's trying to fill him in and kind of like hint at where she's at, but doesn't get far enough before she gets caught by Blackie and Emery, the perfume counter guy that she tried to blackmail earlier. So he like immediately squealed on her, and so she's now basically in, is basically captive, and everyone knows that she's Ben Horn's daughter at this point. So they make a video with her basically to send to Ben, and to get some sort of ransom and all that stuff. And I think at this point, that they're shooting her up with heroin, basically get her addicted, keep her docile, like all that stuff. And possibly OD her, if they need to. So then the one-armed man, Philip Gerard, finally gets his chance to try to sell shoes to Sheriff Truman. And while they're in the room where he's doing this and like showing them different types of boots and stuff, he sees the wanted poster for Bob and also recognizes him. And then kind of is like excuses himself to the bathroom. Shortly after that, we see that, Shelley comes in, and there's Harry and Coop, and she says that she isn't going to testify against Leo because they're married and she knows she doesn't have to. And, Coop immediately realizes what's going on, and he's just like, all right, yeah, fine. Yeah, you certainly don't have to do that. And let's just pray that Leo gets healthy and comes back and is better than ever, that type of thing, and realizes like what a wonderful wife he has, and then kind of just shoos her out the door, and he just like immediately tells Harry, he's like, insurance fraud. I can see it coming a mile away, but what are you going to do? Because they know that she didn't kill him or injure him, so it's not like, I don't know, it's different than like full on fraud, but it's kind of in that gray area, I would say. You're exploiting someone for financial gain, and, so it's not good, but, it's not technically illegal the way that they're doing it, I guess. So back at One-Eyed Jack's, here comes Jean Renault, Jacques' brother, and he's like basically going to take over the show. And he's going to be involved with this whole blackmail thing. And he says, like, yeah, like, I'll help you guys out. And, like, basically, like, you can, basically is like, I'll give you One-Eyed Jack's to Blackie. I don't know if he fully wants to do that. But, and he's like, all I want is Agent Cooper. And they're looking at the TV, like, the CCTV footage from the night that they were on like the secret mission there. So he's like, I want that guy because that's the guy that arrested my brother, and now my brother's dead, so I want him. I want to get revenge on this guy. So then they realize that Gerard, the one-armed man, went to the bathroom, never came back. They go into the bathroom. He's gone. There's a needle on the floor, and I think was some type of drug, but I don't think he ever even got to use it, if I remember right. But it basically is the third clue that the giant gave, which was without chemicals. He points, I don't really fully understand it, but hey, it made sense to them, and they moved on. So if it's good enough for them, whatever, I'm on board. I get it, like all the things are there, all the context is there, but I just don't fully know what the sentence means, if that makes sense. But because he didn't, I forget it. But we'll move on. Back at the hospital, Big Ed's there with Nadine, and they're strapping her down to the bed, and he's like, is that even necessary? And he's like, oh yeah, she broke some restraints or whatever. They're basically just like strapping her down because something's going on where she's like breaking stuff, but she's not conscious yet. So it's like, for her own safety, we're going to strap her to the bed. And then Doc Hayward's like, hey, maybe you can like sing to her, and that'll kind of like wake her up and stuff. And it's like, well, if I'm going to sing to her, then you guys got to get out of here because I don't want to do that in front of you guys. And they're like, all right, that's fine. So they get out, and he starts singing on top of Old Smokey, and she like starts squeezing his hand, and then like her hands are shaking, and then she breaks the restraints and starts clapping. And then so she wakes up, and he's like, hey, like, Nadine, like, are you okay? And then she's like, Doc Hayward said that tonsillitis was, gonna be whatever, but he said I could still do tryouts. And he's like, tryouts for what? He's like, for cheerleading. It's like, after all, you're only 18 once. And then so she has some sort of amnesia where she thinks she's 18 again, and so, but they knew each other, so it's not weird that he's there. But she doesn't, something's crossed, and she thinks she's an 18-year-old again. In another room in the hospital, Dr. Jacoby's recovering from his heart attack that he had, like, during the whole scheme with fake Laura and everything. So he got attacked and had a heart attack, but he wasn't attacked by the three that were doing the scheme, so we don't know who attacked him. But he was attacked, he had a heart attack, and he's recovering in the hospital. They come in there, he's got his wife in there, and his wife, I guess, lives mostly at their place in Hawaii. But she's, there while he's recovering, and, he's got it all decorated in there, just like full on tiki bar in the hospital room. But then he's like, hey, like, we're going to do this hypnosis thing. And he's like, that's fine. I've done it before. Let's just get it going. And basically they want to put him under hypnosis to see if like he subconsciously noticed anything, because he was in the same room as Jacques when he got strangled to death. So they put him under hypnosis and start asking him the questions. And basically all they get is that it is someone that he knows and recognizes, but they don't have an exact answer. And well, I think they do get the answer, but we just don't see it until a little bit later. But so we cut from that scene to Donna visiting Laura's grave, and it's nighttime and everything. And then she's, hey, I'm sorry, I haven't been here since the funeral, and all this stuff's going on. And at first it's like a very nice thing, but she's basically like, this is happening with James. And, it's like, while you were alive, it was always about your problems, and now you're dead and we're still dealing with their problems, basically like that. Just kind of like venting out and getting all her frustration and anger out. And I did write down this. She says, you're dead, but your problems keep hanging around. It's almost as if they didn't bury you deep enough. And then she storms off. So I forget where this happens, but she goes somewhere and catches James and Maddie kissing, so immediately, like, her day's not getting any better. Oh, it's at the Palmer house. Now I remember. So she's there. She shows up as they're kissing, and they're talking about like, hey, I don't know where Donna is. Tried looking for her, all this different stuff. And, talking about like, hey, I think she's acting different. And then, it leads to them kissing. Donna comes in, and then, storms off again. And then I'm pretty sure James follows her out to the street and then just like screams in the night. And it's another just like very soapy moment. I don't want to come off like I'm just making fun of it. Like this is dumb. I don't know. I just love it. I'm not cynical against this, and I don't think any of these people are bad actors or by any means, but some of just the choices are funny. I'll just say that. So then Maddie's upset, obviously, because, she had this kiss, she gets caught, and then both of them leave and she's just alone there with all this emotion and confusion. So she's crying on the couch. Leland comes in to console her, and she's just like, it's like, like I came here for Laura's funeral, and like all I know is that Laura's my cousin. I loved her, and it's almost as if these people think I'm Laura, And then so she's getting all her frustrations out, like Donna just did a few minutes ago. And while this is happening, Coop and Harry come in and say, Leland, you're under arrest for the murder of Jacques Renault. So, so he gets arrested. So yeah, that's how I remember now, that even though they don't say it in the scene where Jacoby is under hypnosis, obviously he did reveal it because they immediately go arrest him. So we see that after Donna ran off, she went straight to Harold's house. She's knocking on the door. He lets her in and gets her like, cup of coffee or some tea, something, a blanket and some warm beverage to warm her up. And then they start talking. And this is also where we realize that Laura Palmer's secret diary is at Harold's house. And I think Donna notices it, not that it gets brought up in conversation, but we see it, the camera sees it, Donna sees it. Back at the sheriff's station, they're interrogating Leland. He basically very quickly admits to killing Jacques, and he's just like, they're like, why'd you think it was him? Because you arrested him, all this like back and forth. And they're like, everyone gets it, but they obviously wish it didn't happen, especially because they needed to get more information from Jacques, and they're not even sure that he was the killer, So, obviously he's a bad dude, but it doesn't necessarily warrant a death sentence from a vigilante, basically. And we'll have even more reason why Leland shouldn't have done it later. So then for some reason, Doc Hayward is at the police station during all this. I don't remember if he was in the interrogation necessarily, but he's there at the sheriff's station, and he stops him. He's like, hey, remember when I got that test with the sperm? I want to do another one. And he's like, all right, gives him the cup and says like, give me a sample. I'll be waiting on the car, basically. So he's off to do that. He grabs a magazine. I don't know where the magazines were, but he has one, and he's going to the bathroom to go get the sample, bumps into Lucy, drops the magazine. And of course she's, like annoyed and bothered by that. So then Jean Renault brings the tape, the blackmail tape, to Ben Horn at his office. They watch it together, and he's kind of pretending like, hey, I don't really care about all that. I just want Cooper, So this can all go back to normal if you just help me get Cooper, basically. So Cooper calls, or so Ben calls Cooper and is basically like, hey, I know where she is. There's this like ransom going on, and I need your help. So meanwhile, Josie has returned from Seattle, and she's like modeling some new dress for Harry. Oh wait, no, that's not yet. So Josie returns. She's talking to Pete, and she's like, oh, like I heard about the fire, and Catherine must be so upset. And then Pete's like, Josie, Catherine died, and then so they kind of share a moment and everything. Back at One-Eyed Jack's, they're, having more conversations about this plan and everything. And then Jean just straight up kills Emery. He's like, this guy's a liability. He's a weasel. I don't need him working on this, so he's dead. And later Donna tells Maddie about the secret diary and says like, we got to figure out a way to go get this. And then also Josie and Truman reunite, and then she's modeling this dress for him, and they're together. But then this is also where he kind of brings up that he's a little suspicious of what she was doing. Like, where'd you go? Where were you staying? Why didn't you tell me? All this stuff. Like, hey, it's kind of weird that you skipped town when all this terrible shit happened with your business, that your dead husband was the owner of, and your sister-in-law that doesn't like you is also a part of, and is dead. So it's very suspicious. He kind of just raises that suspicion, and of course she plays it off. We get another interrogation type scene with Leland, but this time there's a judge present. And so it's a little bit like, hey, you've been through a lot, so we're not going to be too harsh on you right now, Basically, he's like free to go. He's not going to be held, but he is still going to have to go to trial and everything like that. So it's not like, hey, you're not completely off the hook, but we'll at least let you live a somewhat normal life for now while this is all. Basically, it's just like free bail, basically. Then at the Great Northern, we get a new character that we haven't seen yet. It's Mr. Tajimoto, and he's checking into the Great Northern, and then he'll kind of come up more in a little bit, And then also at the Great Northern, Coop's in his room, and then he finally, like, I forget. That's what he's like doing, some sort of like headstand stretch thing, and because he has his head on the floor on a pillow, he can see under the bed, and he sees Audrey's note that he completely missed before. So goes and picks it up, and obviously there's a clue saying like that basically means One-Eyed Jacks, So he's like, oh my god, I know where she is. And we get a scene at now it's Shelly's house because Leo's a vegetable, but they're basically like with the insurance guy and the disability guy, getting like all this like equipment set up for him to live there, basically like a harness to get him out of the wheelchair onto the bed and all these different things. So they're getting that set up. Donna's back at Harold's house, and she brings up the diary, and he's like, well, I can't just let you have it for whatever reason, but I will read it to you in exchange for you kind of giving me your story, because he just likes having, because he's by himself in this house all the time. So he likes having other people's stories, So Donna's going to like basically tell him her life, and then he's going to read her passages from Laura's secret diary. Then we have the official hearing for Leo, where basically Shelly doesn't testify, and then nothing really happens because he's a vegetable. But then it's like kind of like, hey, if he wakes up, then maybe he'll go to trial. But as of right now, there's no point, So what are you gonna do, basically? And and obviously Shelly's no help because she wants to do this like fraud or scam thing with Bobby that is quickly gonna blow up in their face. We see Nadine finally come home from the hospital now that she's awake. James is there because James is Ed's nephew. So James is there. She's like, oh, like, who are you? Like, do you go to our school? That type of thing. And, later on, she refers to him as like, Ed's friend, because she just, anything that happened after she was 18, she has no idea about. So then, back at the Great Northern in Ben's office, here comes the Mr. Tajimoto that we saw checking into the hotel, and he's got some business with Ben, and he's like interested in investing in this like Ghostwood Estates project that's been talked about that we don't really know too much about, but it's like the F plot that's like constantly going on. And so he's a potential investor. Then after that meeting, Coop comes in. Well, first Hank comes in and says, hey, by the way, Coop's coming. And then he disappears out of the room. Coop comes in, gets the briefcase full of money from Ben, and is like, hey, here's the money, just bring her home, make sure she doesn't get hurt, that type of thing. Soon as he leaves, Hank comes back in, and he's like, you follow him and kill him, or let him get killed or kill him, and try to bring back my daughter and the money if you can, you know. So he's fully ready to, like, you know, let Coop die, let any, you know, piss off Jean, whatever it is, you know, he's just like, I want my money back and I want my daughter back. So just make sure it happens. We see Donna and Maddie kind of making a sort of a plan to go steal the diary from Harold. We see Andy getting his results back from Doc Hayward that his sperms are fine. I keep saying sperms because that's how he refers to them. You know, I know that's not the correct way, but so. And hopefully if you're watching this or listening to it, you know that. You know. So now we see the plan coming into fruition. We see Maddie hiding in the bushes outside of Harold's, and she's going to wait for a signal. I think Donna's supposed to, like, flip the lights on and off or something, and that's going to be her key to come in and get the diary while she's distracting Harold. So this is where we see Donna doing kind of her end of the bargain, and she's getting interviewed by Harold and telling her, like, a specific story. And this is a story about how when her and Laura were, I think she said, like 14, which, you know, becomes problematic as the story unfolds, that they went to the Roadhouse, which is a bar, got, like, started flirting with these, like, guys in their 20s, and then they, like, got in the car with them, and then they went skinny dipping and all this stuff, you know, and they made out with like all this stuff, you know, basically nothing that a 14-year-old should be doing with a 20-plus-year-old, you know, nothing that, yeah. So I don't think I need to explain why that's bad. We then cut back to the rescue mission where Coop and Truman are outside of One-Eyed Jack's, which is on the other side of the border. This is on the Canada side, so that will come into play later. It's out of both their jurisdictions, so, you know, obviously this is probably going to create some problems down the line. But they're there outside of One-Eyed Jack's. They're sneaking in. We cut back to Donna and Harold. We see them kiss each other. We see him excuse himself very fast after that happens, and it very much reminded me of the Lonely Island digital short, Jizzed in My Pants. I mean, he's like, oh, I gotta go. So then Donna takes this opportunity to go do the signal. Maddie comes in. They're going to do the diary. Cut back to One-Eyed Jack's. Coop does find Audrey. First, they pass the room where you can see Jean and Blackie inside. It's just like the main office of One-Eyed Jack's. And so Truman stays behind to keep an eye on that situation. And Coop continues down the hall. He finds the room where Audrey is. And she's like, she's way out of it because of the heroin. And she's like, you know, kind of snaps into consciousness a little bit, enough to recognize him and said, I knew you would come. Like, my, you know, prayers have been answered, that type of thing. Meanwhile, back down the hall, Harry sees Jean kill Blackie because she's also a liability, you know, and she's, we did find out that she's, like, addicted to heroin too, and, you know, mentions a lot that Ben's holding out on her, and, you know, she's also kind of out of it, like, a bunch of the time, so he's just like, I gotta get, you know, she's a problem, get rid of her. Harry sees this, goes to, like, shoot Jean, but then Jean notices, dives, and shoots out the window. No one gets hit, but then he gets away, and, you know, they don't get him. But then this is when Coop's coming out. He had an attempted attack on him by Blackie's sister. I forget her name, but she showed up with Jean, and, you know, he knocks her out. I don't remember if he kills her or not, but so knocks her out. Gets Audrey. They escape. They almost escape, but then there's a guy about to stop them at the bottom of the stairs, and they give up their guns and everything, and it looks like they're done for. And then that guy gets shot in the back, and then we see that Deputy Hawk has arrived. Now, for some reason, they were keeping him out of this. They just didn't want too many cooks, I guess. But then, thank God that he, you know, could see through them, and he's like, you guys are terrible at keeping secrets, and you can basically save their ass. So then as they're escaping, Hank's just kind of watching it, and then he's calling Ben. He's like, hey, it's not going according to plan. This is what happened. And then as he's telling this, then Jean comes up behind him and basically, kidnaps him or, holds him hostage. So, speaking of people getting caught, back at Harold's place, while Maddie comes in to steal the diary, makes too much noise. Immediately, Harold sees, and then realizes, like, oh my, like, this is all you wanted. This is all you cared about, and I thought you cared about me. And he has his because he's got like a greenhouse in the house, and a lot of plants everywhere, and so he has the I forget what it's called, but it's like the 3-pronged thing, like not quite a rake because it's not like fine toothed, but where there's like the 3 things. I don't think it's a trowel. I think that's like the shovel, but I'm not a gardener, but I know I've seen that tool before, and kind of know what it's for, but I just don't remember the name of it. But it's got like the 3 things, and then he like kind of just scratches it down his face until like blood's coming out, and they're like, oh my god, and then they run out, and obviously he's upset, they're upset, and then he starts trashing his place, I'm pretty sure. If not now, then in a little bit. Oh yeah, but before they get out, in comes James and saves them or whatever, and then they all leave together, and then Harold's crashing out. Meanwhile, Coop and Truman and Hawk are stashing Audrey at the book house, which I don't think I really talked about that, but there's like this, it's an old building in the town, and there's like kind of like a secret society, not so much a gang, but like the good guys that are together are the book house boys, and this is where they meet up, and so they're like, all right, she's gonna be safe here. And then I forget what the telltale sign was, but they do figure out that Coop was set up, that he was basically there to... Oh, I think basically because once they realize who Jean Renault was, they're like, obviously I was set up because I had a hand in catching his brother, and the brother's dead, so this is some sort of revenge thing. So he knows he was set up, but he just doesn't have the evidence to prove that Ben was part of that setup. But he does tell Ben what happened, and Ben's kind of like nonchalant about it at first until he finds out that Audrey basically almost OD'd on heroin, and then now he's like a little upset, like, oh, okay, like this is further than I thought it was. But in the end, he is happy that she's okay, and he's like, can I see her? And she's like, she's resting now, but soon, just like let her rest, and then he'll be reunited. So then we get a scene of Leo coming home from the hospital. He's in like an old timey wheelchair. It looks very much like some Citizen Kane shit. But is there even a wheelchair in Citizen Kane? Something from that era though. And so he's in this like old timey wheelchair. They bring him home. They're like, they're having trouble getting him through the door, banging him around and all this stuff. And then the representative from like the insurance company is there, or disability, Social Security, whatever it is. They don't really go into like exactly what pot of money this is coming from, but it's one of those big 3. And so they're getting that set up and everything. And this is where we find out that, cause he gives them the check and he's like, oh man, you guys are such good people for doing this for him and everything like that. Obviously this guy doesn't know like what Leo's real deal is, but he's just like, thank you guys so much. You guys are amazing for doing this for him. They think that Bobby is Leo's cousin, so get them all set up and settle it and everything. And it's like, oh, and then, that brings us to the check. And then he hands Shelly the check, and then she's like, this is only for $700. So I thought we were supposed to get $5,000. He's like, well, with medical fees and, so basically the equipment and medical expenses, like all that stuff just deducts it, and it goes from $5,000 to $700. So they're pissed at this point. Well, Shelly's extra pissed because she got talked into this by Bobby. Leo could be in prison, in like whatever hospital prison that they go in, but now they're basically stuck babysitting him for only $700 a month. And this is, and taking care of someone who's like that handicapped is a full-time job. It's not just like, You come in and check on him, and then you go do your regular job. That's full time, And the only one with a job is Shelley. So, because Bobby's still in high school technically, even though we only see him there in like one scene in season 1. So then after a little bit, we get a scene of Donna talking to Sheriff Truman about Laura's secret diary, and he's like, we have the diary, and she's like, no, this is a secret one that only Harold had. And I don't remember. Yeah, they didn't get it because they got caught. So, all that got messed up. And she's like, hey, this exists and Harold has it. So I don't know if you guys need a warrant or whatever, but, just so you know, this major piece of evidence is at this guy's house. Now, during this moment when they're in like whatever conference room, this is when director, I don't remember if he's director or just deputy director, I don't know, someone higher up in the FBI, Gordon Cole, played by David Lynch, he shows up. And now this is one of my favorite characters. He has a bigger arc in The Return, but it's David Lynch, obviously. He's playing the character. He's supposed to be hard of hearing, so he's got like the old school hearing aids, never hears what anyone's saying, just like always gets it wrong, all that stuff. So, great for comedic stuff. And so he shows up to make sure Coop's okay because he got shot. Obviously, he's got to show up and make sure everything's good. Back at the bookhouse, Audrey's awake. They bring Ben in to reunite them, but also, so she can go home, everything like that. Audrey knows too much at this point, and she does tells her dad, kind of like, I saw so much, and he kind of like isn't sure what she means by that, but he knows it's not good for him. But, he tries to play it off and everything. And he's like, all right, well, let's go home. And she's like, I want to go with Agent Cooper. And he's not happy about that because he's already accused Coop of having like ulterior motives of why he's so interested in like rescuing his daughter before he knew like how much danger she was actually in, because they've been like kind of flirty and stuff like that, even though Coop said like, hey, you know what, I'm an FBI agent and you're 18, thank God 18, but still it's still like a big age gap, and he's in a position of power and she's still in high school even though she's 18. So it's, obviously not a good situation, and I'm glad that they eventually kind of moved away from that as the season went on. Not that anything actually happened with them, but, still, they were kind of setting that up, and I'm glad they didn't follow through with that. So Maddie decides that she's been here long enough, and things are getting weird and complicated and everything, and she has a whole life back in Missoula, which is where she came from to come to Laura's funeral. And the interesting thing is that that's where David Lynch was born, was Missoula, Montana, and that's why Twin Peaks takes place in the PNW, because he was born in Missoula, which isn't Pacific Northwest, but he lived in like Spokane and Sandpoint and all these places that are up in this area. So that's why it kind of takes place up here. Even though it was mostly filmed on the west side, it's supposed to kind of take place over on this side. I'm on the east side of Washington right now, right near the Idaho border. And that's it's supposed to take place on this side, but further north, obviously, because they're really close to the Canada border. But yeah, she's decided she's going to go back home to Missoula. And so she's telling James this much, and she says, hey, I know things got weird, but I'm smart enough to know that when you kissed me, it was because you looked in my eyes and you saw Laura, and that's who you have feelings for, not me. Even though you might have some, I know it's like there's this extra layer that I can never live up to. So she's like, I have my life. I'm going to go back to that. Back at the Johnston residence, they're kind of throwing like a welcome home party for Leo. And, they got streamers and a cake and stuff like that. At some point during this, it looks like Leo, while Shelly and Bobby are kissing, they like Shelly's like, I saw him move, and they're like, no, there's no way. And then this is also when he starts kind of like not talking, but he spits and then says like new shoes, and then he'll do this like quite a bit for a little bit. We see Gordon Cole talking with Coop and how the FBI had got a note from Wyndham Earl, his former partner, who Albert informed Coop earlier that he kind of started cropping up a little bit. And the note is just like it's like a chess thing. So it's like the starting moves of a chess match. So basically it's, that kind of comes more into play later, but, so that's the initial note. And Coop immediately knows what it is. Like, hey, this is chess related. I kind of know what's starting here, even though I don't know everything yet. So then Josie gets pressured to leave with a guy that works with her dead husband, Catherine's brother. Like, his competitor is this like other guy, and I forget his name right now. But so he's got this other guy that was following her, this other Asian guy from Hong Kong, also Chinese. So he was there, like kind of like observing, and he was calling, and then we see that that him and Josie had sex, but she kind of seems upset by it, so we don't know exactly how consensual it was or anything like that. Obviously, probably not. And if it was, then she immediately regretted it. So, but we didn't see it initiate or during, so we just see the aftermath, and she's upset. So, not good, but so she's gonna leave with this guy. She's told it's conflicting things, because she told Pete one thing and Harry another thing. One person thinks that that's her cousin, and one thinks it's her assistant. So, but obviously this guy's a little pushy, and she's all of a sudden going to leave with this guy and is upset with it, and is kind of like breaking it off with Harry. He's obviously upset and tries to get her to stop. And she's like, are you saying I can't go as sheriff or as someone else? And he doesn't, he's like, as someone else, like as your boyfriend, basically. And she's like, well, I then I gotta go, basically like, hey, I don't want to hurt you anymore, so I'm gonna get out of here, but unless I legally can't go, then I'm out, because she's just trying to protect him, because she does actually love him. So they finally do find Gerard again, the one-armed man, and they start interrogating him, because he obviously recognized Bob, and then he disappeared and all this stuff. So, and left like some hypodermic needle in the bathroom. So they start interrogating him after they find him. At some point during this, he reveals himself to actually be Mike. Now, Mike is kind of in the same realm as Bob, and Mike is using Philip Gerard as like a vessel, basically. And we'll later learn, I won't reveal it yet, just in case I don't get this far in this episode. But we'll later learn that Bob is using someone as a vessel as well. So, and his demeanor changes when he turns into Mike and all this stuff. And he's talking about like, I know Bob and we come from the same place. And then he talks about how like they would kill together. Like they were basically like kind of partners or something like that. But then Mike didn't want to kill anymore, so he cut off his own arm. But Bob kept going, and then he's like, where? Well, they're like, all right, well, where is Bob? And then he says he's at it's like a house with many rooms or something like that. All identical, but the souls change from night to night, and so they're like, oh, it's a hotel. It's the Great Northern. So while they're about to head there, they give Hawk the warrant to go search Harold's house, because they know that the secret diary's there. They're going to go get it. So Hawk goes over to Harold Smith's house to go get it, knocks on the door, no answer, sees that it's open, comes in, and there's Harold, who's hung himself in the greenhouse. And he's got a note attached to him, and he's, was so upset by everything that happened that he just ended up killing himself. Cut back to the Palmer residence where Maddie is letting Sarah and Leland know that she's going to go back home to Missoula. And, Sarah's like a little upset but understanding, they're both understanding, and Leland's more she's got another life. She's got to get back to it, even though we love having her here and you're always welcome back. All this stuff, all the normal stuff that you say. So now back at Harold's house, there's obviously more people showing up, I think. But, not the full group. But so Hawk finds the secret diary. Back at the Johnson residence, they're struggling to deal with the whole situation because Shelley's trying to feed Leo and he keeps spitting it out and saying new shoes over and over again. And, so it's obviously very frustrating situation. Bobby's not helping as much as he should for the guy whose whole idea this was. Back at the Great Northern, Audrey confronts her dad saying hey, I know what One-Eyed Jacks is because I was there. I know that you're the owner. And she just asks, did you know Laura worked there? And he said, yes. I forget if that was a yes or he found out later after she was fired, all that. But he knew that she worked there. And then she just comes right out and asks, did you sleep with her? And he's very hesitant, but he admits it. So Ben Horne did sleep with Laura. And then he says that he loved her, and us and Audrey don't know how to handle that, because he's much older. It's way different than the 20-year-old guys back at. Well, depends on how old Laura was. If she was 18 or 17, it's still bad. It's a bigger age gap, and he's a way more power than those random 20-year-olds that the Roadhouse had. So, it's a worse situation, but he says he loved her. Who knows? He does have a picture of her on his desk, which is fucking weird, especially if if her dad is your lawyer. What does he think about that? So, and we don't know. So after the whole frustrating morning that she had, Shelley goes to work at the Double R and, kind of tearfully tells Norma, hey, I can't work anymore. I don't have the time. This Leo stuff's a full-time thing. I'm so sorry. I have to go. And Norma's I get it. It's okay. And if you need your job back, you got it, So, they have a tearful, embrace and everything after that. Then after that, then here come Ed and Nadine up to the counter. They sit at the bar, and Nadine's Norma, you work here? How long have you worked here? And Norma's I think almost 20 years. And Nadine's what? Because she thinks that they're all still in high school, and and Ed's oh, she's just kidding, trying to keep the illusion alive, basically. And so she orders a milkshake. She ends up squeezing the glass so hard that it breaks, and all this stuff, because that's the other thing, is she has this incredible strength after her not even just after her coma. I think she had it before, because there's a scene in season 1 where she's working out and she's all frustrated and she ends up bending the bars on the rowing machine or something like that. So we know that she has this crazy strength, but I think it's even worse or greater after the coma. Back at the Johnson house, it's just Bobby there alone with Leo, because Shelley went to work, so he's taking care of Leo. But Mike comes over, his friend that is Donna's ex-boyfriend, so he comes over and they're all right, there's Leo keeps talking about new shoes. There's got to be something weird with these boots or something. So let's tear them apart and try to find something. And they're hoping it's going to be money, but they take the sole off the boot and there's a tape in there. And not the full cassette size, but the little mini ones. I don't know how many y'all have been around in the cassette days, but I remember him. So now they do have the secret diary, and there is an entry in there that says, like, someday I'm going to tell the world the truth about Ben Horn and who he really is. They don't know what this means, but this, along with all the One-Eyed Jack stuff and all the stuff that Audrey learned, because she comes shortly after Coop reads this, Audrey comes and says, hey, this is everything I found out. And even after I got back and confronted my dad, this is what he admitted, that he slept with Laura. And then there's this entry in the thing. And so this is enough evidence for them to issue a warrant to arrest Ben Horn, which they do. And then there's also a mention about Bob in the diary, but I forget what the exact detail is. So then we get over to the Palmer house, and immediately it feels ominous. You know, all we see is there's the record player, and there's the record spinning, like where the like after a record's done and the needle's just like stuck in the center part with the paper, and it's just the constant like that type of thing. So the record's spinning, and there's like a tone going on, and so something's weird, and then it's confirmed to be weird because then we see Sarah crawling down the stairs like slow, and she's like calling for Leland, and we don't see him. So we're gonna cut back and forth between whatever the fuck's going on here at the Palmer house and the rest of the town. Back at the station, the log lady shows up, and then she says, like, we, as her and the log, something is like, we know something's happening, but we don't know what. So they're like, all right, like they're ready, especially Coop, who's like in tuned with this like spiritual stuff, and immediately believes it. Back at the Martell residence, Pete is getting up in the night for like a midnight snack or something. It's dark. He goes to the kitchen. He's coming back with like a plate of cookies with some milk, and all of a sudden, like, Mr. Tajimoto's there, and he gets startled, and then Mr. Tajimoto immediately starts kissing Pete, and he's like, hey, listen here, buddy, that type of thing, like getting all worked up about it, and then Mr. Tajimoto starts talking, but then the voice changes, and then it's a female voice, and then we slowly realize she's like, dummy, it's me, it's Catherine. So Catherine is wearing a very probably a pretty insensitive Japanese man costume. They don't fully say that he's Japanese or supposed to be, but I would guess from that name that it would be Japanese. But I'm not an expert in Asian surnames. But so yeah, Catherine is alive. Was pretending to be this Mr. Tajimoto guy. And, so now they're reunited. So they're back together. And, Pete, like, once he realizes what's going on, he's like, man, you look terrible. And then they laugh and stuff. So then it moves on from that scene to Sarah back crawling on the living room floor. And then as she crawls into the living room, she looks up, and then in the middle of the living room, a white horse appears. Like, it's not there. It appears, and then it disappears again. And I don't yeah. Oh, never mind. It's not in the show, but in the intros that are on the Blu-ray. And I think these weren't with the show when it initially aired, but when it's first aired in syndication, and I forget which channel, it might have been Bravo. But the first time it aired in syndication on cable, they had intros at the beginning of the episode with Catherine Coulson as the log lady. So I think at the beginning of this episode, she does reference the like seeing the pale white horse from literature. I forget if it's like a poem or it might even be from the Bible. I don't really remember, but it's something that's like, if I hear the phrase pale white horse, I'm not like, where did that come from? It's something that feels familiar, even though I can't like place it right off the bat. But so it's in reference to that. So yeah, she sees this pale white horse. It appears, it disappears, and then after it disappears, she basically faints. She passes out. So she's laying on the floor, passed out. Camera pans over, and then there's Leland just standing in the entryway, looking in the mirror, adjusting his tie. Like nothing weird is going on. So, cut away from that to the Roadhouse, and you have the singer Julie Cruz. She's performing. She's doing this like haunting song that's kind of set to Laura's theme, or it's one of the Angelo Badalamenti themes of the show. I don't remember if it's exactly Laura's theme, but it's a familiar tune, but this time with lyrics and a little slower version. As she's singing, we see I think it's Truman. For sure it's Cooper and the Log Lady, and I think Truman too. So they show up and they get a table and they're sitting down at the Roadhouse. And we also see that Donna and James are there in a booth and they're talking. And it seems to be like going well. Like it seems to be like kind of like, hey, like sorry about before. They talk about Harold and kind of like how, hey, like James is very like, hey, you know what? That I know that's bad what happened, but it's not your fault. And, obviously there's some guilt there. And, maybe things could have been different if they hadn't got involved or been scheming behind him and stuff like that. But he's also a very, disturbed man. And, and I'm not the expert on this stuff, I struggle with my own mental health stuff, and I'm not going to say like, just because I feel a certain way that this is like a catch-all fact, but for the most part, it's not like any one thing that's going to cause someone to do that. So, and in the end, it's up to the person to actually do it, and there's only so much that other people can do to stop that. So that's all I'll say on that. But yeah, they're there. The other three arrive and have a separate table. The performance continues to go. It's just very hauntingly beautiful song. I wish I should have wrote down like the actual like title of the song, but just go to the episode and go to the song section on IMDb and you're going to find it. It's the one by Julie Cruz. So after the three from the station get settled at their table, eventually the stage everyone on the stage kind of fades away and the giant appears at the mic. And it seems like that Coop is the only one that's seeing this. And the giant looks directly at Cooper and just says, "It's happening again." And I think he repeats it a couple times. And, there's a look of concern, and Coop knows like, fuck, something bad's happening. Cut back to the Palmer house and back to Leland adjusting his tie in the mirror, except this time we see the reflection is not Leland, it is Bob. Bob is inside Leland. And so it is well done. Like it looks disturbing, just the way that like he's looking in the mirror, but like Bob's just like smiling back at him. And this is an unsettling scene and probably one of the scariest scenes in the show. Maybe not counting the return, because they definitely up it in the return, but this one's like, this is intense and like a little too much at parts. But so he's adjusting his tie in the mirror, and then he turns and pulls some white gloves out of his pocket and puts those on slowly, as we hear Maddie saying like, "Uncle Leland, Aunt Sarah, like what's going on? What's that smell?" And then she comes into the living room from upstairs, sees her Aunt Sarah on the floor and Leland standing there with white gloves on, and then immediately knows this is bad and starts to run. Leland chases her, grabs her, punches her in the face like multiple times, kind of wrestles her onto the couch, punches her again, hits her hard enough to where she like can't get away necessarily. She's still alive and conscious, but like I think it's enough to where it kind of immobilized her. And he picks her up and starts like twirling her around the living room, and he's like crying, and then they're like dancing, and like he says like, "Oh, Laura," all this stuff. It's super. It's a lot to handle. But yeah, then he's like, he's dancing with her and like crying, and then he starts kissing her, and then we're seeing it change, like from when he's chasing her to now and to till the end of the scene. It's switching back and forth between him and Bob, and it's very well done. It's very like seamless, and surprisingly seamless for 1990 television in 1990, not even a film in 1990. But yeah, keeps calling her Laura, and then eventually he's just like says like, "You're going back to Missoula, Montana," and then he smashes her face into a glass picture, and then she's I think at this point she's like passed out. I don't think she's dead yet, but then he does kill her. But before he does that we see him get some tools and starts messing with her fingernail, because obviously he's going to put a little letter in there because he's the killer. I don't know if it's I don't know if you didn't get this, if you haven't seen it, and this is how you're consuming the show, and you haven't watched it, and you're getting everything from me. Leland Palmer, possessed by Bob, is the killer from the beginning. So just putting that out there. If you didn't get it, now you know. So then, after this, after it's for sure what's happening, we cut back to the roadhouse. The giant fades away, and then because he was at the bar too, and I think we see him sitting next to Major Briggs, but the old man that works at the hotel, that was like completely unhelpful in that first episode of season 2, he walks up to Coop and just sitting there, he just like very emotionally just says, "I'm so sorry," and then kind of pats him on the shoulder and walks away. And so more confirmation that something bad has happened. He walks away. We cut over to James and Donna, and they're like mouthing the words to the song along to each other and kind of like smiling. But then before the previous scene, we kind of see that. But so yeah, they're kind of having this moment. But then after Maddie is killed, then they're Donna just starts crying out of nowhere. We cut to Bobby, who's sitting at the bar, and he's getting emotional, and it's completely unrelated to their stuff, And for him, it's probably the overwhelming stuff with Leo and how it was his idea and it's not working out, and But I think everyone just kind of gets this overwhelming sense that something bad has happened, because on a spiritual level, they're getting it, even though they don't know what happened yet. Then in the next episode, it starts with Donna and James show up at the Palmer house. They knock on the door because they're wanting to say bye to Maddie before she drives off. And Leland's like, "Oh, yeah, I already dropped her off at the bus station like 30 minutes ago." But it's also kind of weird because he's like in the living room putting, like he's got he's got his putter and some golf balls. They look over in the corner, there's like 100 golf balls, like an insane amount. So after they're told that she's not there, and like, "Oh, we'll write her and stuff, and we're sorry that we couldn't be here," and so they leave. Leland goes to the closet, gets a very large duffel bag out of the closet, unzips it to put something in, and we see bloody fingers and hair. So Maddie's body's in there. Now Ben has been arrested. We see him in his cell. Here comes his brother Jerry, and he's going to be his representative because his regular lawyer is also being held for murder. Not being held, but under suspicion for murder. So he's got his own trial to worry about. So they're like, "All right, well, I went to law school. I'll be your lawyer." Back at the Great Northern, they run into Leland in the lobby. Now he's been like dancing around and being weird because that now we know that it's after he kills someone. Then he's like all of a sudden weird and happy for no reason, for some reason. So he's doing that. Cooper and Truman tell him, like, hey, so we arrested Ben, and we arrested him for the murder of Laura. And this is where he kind of is like, what do you mean? I thought Jacques Renault killed Laura. And, so now he's like kind of conflicted in his head. But we see him go around the corner, and everyone thinks he's crying, and he is crying, and then it turns into like evil laughter. But only the audience knows that. So then we see a little bit of the interrogation of Ben. We don't really learn too much. And we know that, it's not, that he's not the one that did it. But they don't know that yet. It doesn't go well. Coop kind of calls out Jerry for kind of being a shitty lawyer who's got like disbarred in like multiple states and, graduated the bottom of his class at Gonzaga and all this different stuff. So yeah, like, and then Jerry just straight up tells Ben, like, afterwards, is like, my advice, get a better lawyer, And then I don't think, so I don't know I think it's just Bobby listening to it, but the tape basically has Ben admitting to guilt with the burning of the mill, and it has him talking to Leo and telling him to burn the mill, so they know that both of those people were involved. But I don't think it hasn't gotten into law enforcement hands yet. Back at the Double R, Norma's mom shows up, and you could tell that there's like kind of not a great relationship between them. And she also has a new husband back at the Great Northern in whatever, I think it's at the Great Northern or the hospital. Either way, Mike is somewhere being like monitored. Mike with the one arm, because now we know that that's who he really is, and Philip Gerard's just like a vessel. But he's in Mike mode at this point, and he just like all of a sudden like says like he's close, talking about Bob probably. And then Lucy is at the station with her sister and her sister's baby. Lucy's holding the baby. Andy shows up to work, sees Lucy with the baby, and he's a little slow, so he thinks that that's the baby and faints. Pete comes to the jail cell where Ben is with a tape recorder, and it's basically Catherine saying, hey, I'm alive, and you're going to go down for trying to get rid of me, and I'll make sure you can get out of here if you sign over the mill and one other thing, the Ghostwood stuff. Cut to Leland driving in his convertible, and he's swerving all over the road, and eventually almost hits Coop and Harry going the other way, and they pull him over, and he's like, I'm sorry guys, I must have just like kind of been in like a daze or something like that. And he's completely playing it off and acting normal and all. It's like, I think it's just the Ben stuff, and they're like, yeah, that's understandable, just like watch what you're doing and everything. And he's like, oh, do you golf, Agent Cooper? And he's like, a little bit. And he's like, oh, I gotta show you this new putter I have. And he goes to the trunk, which is where we know that a dead body is, and he opens the trunk, and we can see like that there's a dead body and a weapon, all the golf clubs. But they get a call saying, hey, Gerard escaped, and get back here. And so they have to rush off before Leland can do anything to them or get caught, whatever. Andy confronts Lucy, tells him the truth, like said, hey, like I thought my sperms didn't work. Turns out they do. And it's super awkward because the sister's like right there and like keeps putting in her 2 cents, and both of them are getting annoyed with her. So yeah, the call was that they found Mike / Philip Gerard. They have him, basically they're kind of like taking him around like a drug sniffing dog to find Bob, because they know Bob is in someone. And so they bring him to Ben, and he's like, nah, that's not him, So then, like, they're like, they have no idea what's going on. Like, Jerry and Ben, it's like, I don't know what the fuck that was about, but hey, I've been here for this many hours, and so unless you're gonna charge me with a crime, you gotta let me go. And then Harry's like, he's so adamant that Ben's guilty, you know, because he's not as in tune to the spiritual stuff as Coop is, obviously. So he's just like, fine, then I'm charging you with the murder of Laura Palmer, you know, that type of thing. And then Coop like kind of brings him to the side. He's like, hey, I don't think he actually did it. So you got to be careful with this. And, you know, and he's like, well, we don't have any evidence otherwise. So for now, we're going to go with this. And he also says like, hey, this isn't my jurisdiction. It's yours. This is your town. So I respect your decisions, but just so you know, I don't think it was him. So Hank shows up at the Double R where his mother-in-law and her new husband are. They get introduced, but we later find out when they are alone talking to each other that they know each other from prison. So Ernie's also not a great guy. He was in prison with Hank, and they're both up to some shady shit all the time. Audrey comes to Coop's room, but I forget what she's there to tell him or ask him about. But they get interrupted because they get a call saying, hey, there's a dead body. And, you know, we don't know that yet. We don't know, like, that's what the call said. But as soon as Coop gets the call, he's like, I'll be right there. And he tells Audrey, he's like, go to your room, you know, like, don't go to your room. Don't ask questions. Lock the door, you know, just go get somewhere safe. And he rushes off. They get to the waterfall, and there's Maddie's dead body. You know, they turn her over. They open the plastic because it's the same way as Laura, and it's Maddie Ferguson. Now, and then when they go to like notify people, like, hey, like this is what happened, like Maddie's family, the Palmers, like all that. There, Coop has a feeling. He's like, Harry, give me 24 hours to put an end to this. And if I haven't solved it by then, you know, then continue with what you got to do. But I'm pretty sure I know what to do. Give me 24 hours. And then he agrees. James gives Donna a ring, which like maybe is an engagement ring. He's like, I just think we should be together forever, but doesn't like actually come right out and say like, will you marry me? Like, or any of that stuff. Like, this is a promise ring that I'm gonna, you know, propose. None of that. It's just like, hey, here's a ring. I think we should be together forever. Later episodes will contradict that. They run into, this happens at the Double R. As they're about to leave, they pass Andy, who is repeating a French phrase to himself. And I forget like what the French phrase is, but it's basically the same. He's repeating it because it was in Harold's suicide note. Donna recognizes it as what Mrs. Tremont's grandson said, you know, the David Lynch's son. So she tells Coop and is like, hey, the suicide note had this thing. I met this kid. Maybe they're connected. Let's go talk to this Mrs. Tremont together. They get there. Completely different lady answers the door. And he's like, oh, maybe I talked to your mother. And he's like, my mother's been dead for like 2 years. And it's like, well, are you sure she was here with her grandson? He's like, I don't have any kids, you know? So something supernatural happened there, you know, obviously. But they're like, and Coop can figure that out. And he's just like, Donna, let's just go, you know, like he knows like we're not going to get anywhere with this lady and there's something bigger going on. So let's get out of here and we'll figure it out. But while they're there, she has like a piece of mail that was Harold's, and she's like, hey, like I got this. I was going to give it to the cops. I just haven't had a chance yet because everything just happened, obviously. But they open it up because it's addressed to Donna, and I think she left it there, or he left it with her, or something like that. But and it's the missing pages from Laura's secret diary. And what we end up gathering from this is her dream about the Red Room at the Black Lodge. It's the same dream that Coop had in season 1, where he's an old man There's the little man that's talking backwards, and the woman that looks like Laura Palmer, but she says that she's that guy's cousin, and and whispers something in his ear that we don't get to hear. So she talks about that dream in the diary, but then also says that she writes in the diary that she knows that this is the night she's gonna die, and that's the one, the last entry basically. They go back and talk to Mike, the one-armed man. He tells Coop, like, you have all the clues. Just got to put them together. Cut to Catherine back in her Tajimoto disguise, coming to visit Ben. Ben thinks is like, oh, I thought you left town because of the deal went weird. And I'm sorry, I'm in here. I'll be out of here in no time. She just pulls off her shoe and like puts her painted toenails through the bars, and Ben figures out like, oh my God, it's Catherine, And then this is where she makes him sign over that stuff to her. It basically in exchange for her saying that Ben was with me the night Laura died. So then Donna heads over to the Palmer house because she's none the wiser about anything suspicious going on that front. And she tells Leland about Donna's secret diary. And because we know the truth, we're seeing him like starting to unravel. She's like, no, the cops found her diary is in the room. She's like, no, this is a secret diary. And so he's getting nervous that he's about to get caught, basically. Bob is. While Donna's telling him this, before he can say anything to reveal that anything like suspicious is going on, the phone rings, and it's Maddie's mom saying that she never made it home. And he's like, and Donna can tell from context clues on his side of the conversation that that's what's happened. And she's like already getting nervous about it. We see in the reflection that Bob is starting to come out more, and Donna's in danger. Because he's also like acting really weird towards her too. But she's saved by Truman showing up and telling Leland that, hey, you got to come with us. Like, something happened. We got to go figure it out. I think this is where Donna fully puts it together that Maddie's dead. And so she tells James. James starts, being weird, and he's like, we could have helped her. And she's like, how? He's like, I don't know. Another like weird, funny James freak out. And then he ends up just like, he gets on his motorcycle and he just leaves town. So much for we should be together forever. Then we get to the roadhouse, and it's Ben is sitting at a booth eating like peanuts or something. And he's still looking disheveled because he's been in jail. They bring Leland there, and then Bobby's there with Leo, and then Major Briggs is there with the old man from before. He's like, hey, I was on my way. I was just driving, and I saw this guy on the side of the road, and he flagged me down and asked if I can give him a ride here. And there's a couple other people. I think I'm forgetting someone. Yeah, Leland, Ben, Leo, Briggs. Oh, and that's what it is. That's what's interesting is that at some point, the old man pulls out a pack of gum, and Briggs notices it and says, like, I used to love... Oh, wait, no, not Briggs. Leland notices the gum and says, like, I used to chew that gum when I was a kid. Like, and then the old man says, that gum you like is coming back in style, which is what the little man said in the Black Lodge, but backwards. And then it's at this point that Coop flashes back to the dream where he's an old man and Laura whispers in his ear. And at this point, because he's like, he thought he knew who did it, but then he forgot, after he woke up and everything. So this time he can actually hear, or he can hear and we can hear as the audience, and we hear her say, my father killed me, as when she whispers in his ear. So he knows the truth now. And he's like, all right, We got to take Ben back in. Leland, can you accompany Ben as his, legal representation? So they get back to the sheriff's station without explaining anything to all those other guys, and they're all just confused, like, I guess we just hang out here, and I'm sure Bobby and Major Briggs are both wondering why each other is there. But so the all law enforcement people, Ben and Leland, head back to the sheriff's station, and as they're about to put Ben into the interrogation room, they and as they're on their way, Cooper does whisper into Harry's ear, like, hey, I have a plan, just go with it, that type of thing. We don't know exactly what he said, but so they get to that room and they open the door and they're going to put Ben in, but they immediately push him out of the way and shove Leland in there and lock it. And Leland just starts freaking out. Well, Bob starts freaking out, and Bob comes out, and he's just getting worked up. He's like breathing heavy and he's running into the walls and stuff like that. And Harry's like, all right, what's going on? And Cooper's like, in the dream, I remembered that she told me in the dream that it was her father that killed her. And he's like, I need more to go off than that. And Coop's like, how about a confession? And they know they're going to work a confession out of Bob, basically. And so they get him cuffed. They finally get him in a chair and everything, and they start asking him questions. And, Bob's just completely crazy. And they're like, did you kill, so-and-so? And he's like, yeah, I guess I did. I guess I sort of did, that type of thing. And, it just keeps getting worked up. They leave him in there. The cigarette smoke sets off the smoke alarm. The sprinkler systems go, and once it starts like raining in the interrogation room, that's when Bob really fucking loses it. He runs Leland into the door and bashes his head open, and repeatedly, and they get in there, and they were warned before they left him in the room that Leland's been a good vessel, but I'm gonna leave him, and you get to watch him deal with the things that he's done, So basically this kind of confirms that Leland wasn't fully conscious of what he had done. It was all Bob, but then once Bob leaves Leland's body, now everything floods back to him. And he's just like, he's very emotional and crying, obviously. He just realized that he murdered his daughter and his niece and, another guy. Well, he knew that he killed Jacques, but yeah, and he's just like, I didn't know, and then like, he would like basically black out, and then when he would come to, he wouldn't remember what happened, and but now he remembers that he killed Laura, he killed Maddie, he killed Teresa Banks, and so all those cases are solved at once in one confession, and then Leland does just end up dying, and Coop does like kind of console him and, just say like, you weren't in control, and I think that Laura understands, that type of thing. And, so he dies. So then the next episode, so this is like kind of the end of the first arc of good episodes. So actually maybe this is a good spot to cut it. And I think what I'll do for actually, you know what? I'm going to keep going because it's like less than a page of notes for the next 2 episodes. So I'm going to keep going until I get to like half the episodes. But this is the end of like the good arc of episodes. And now the most of the rest of it is not great compared to other stuff. Now, if you're a fan, you learn to love it for the most part. I mean, not everyone, but me personally, it's like I can still find stuff I like in these episodes. A lot of it is pretty eye-rolly, and compared to other episodes that I have multiple pages of notes on, 2 episodes don't even take up a full page, as you can see. So I'll just keep it going. Next episode is 3 days later. They're getting ready for Leland's funeral. They kind of let Sarah know like everything that happened, all the like the Bob stuff, everything, Then at the like wake after, because we don't actually see the funeral, but they're at I don't know if it's a wake, but when everyone's together afterwards and they're having food. The mayor is there with his brother and they start fighting. Apparently there's some like long feud that's been going on between them forever. They know that Coop's talking that he's gonna leave town soon because the case is over, and he was only there for that, to solve that case. You know, he's not a Twin Peaks resident. He's an FBI agent from somewhere else. So yeah, he's gonna have to leave. Afterwards, we see Nadine being enrolled in school because she thinks she's 18. So, and you know, the principal's like kind of like, you want me to enroll a 35-year-old woman into, you know, senior year? But Jacoby's there with Ed kind of explaining the situation and everything. And they do agree to let her enroll. We get a goodbye scene between Audrey and Coop where, you know, she's like, you know, I'm always going to have feelings for you. And someday I'm going to be more grown up and on my own. And I'm coming for you, that type of thing. And he reiterates that he's an FBI agent and she's a high school student and all this stuff, you know. So they repeat that. And he also like tells her about when he has been in love and that he got her killed basically because he was supposed to protect her and she ended up dead. And there's going to be more on that later. We'll get more details from that story. So then he goes to say goodbye to Harry, and this is where Harry gives him like a patch, making him part of the Bookhouse Boys, and he's like, you know, we all talked about it and you're one of us, you know. And Coop's very touched by this, and as they're saying goodbye and he's about to leave, in comes an FBI agent that Coop recognizes and a Canadian Mountie. And the FBI agent immediately says, like, you're suspended from the FBI right now because of all the stuff he did going over the border and everything like that. We get a scene of Ben trying to get hired, or Bobby trying to get hired working for Ben. We see Nadine at the high school cheer tryouts, and she like throws somebody 50 feet in the air or something like that. We did another scene of Leo moving again, you know, so he's progressing, you know, he's doing more and more, you know. First he was just repeating the same phrase over again, now he's kind of moving a little bit. Then we find out that Norma's mom was the food critic that everyone was all worked up about. I didn't really mention it before, but because this is the only important part of it, is this part of the story. She's this like big time food critic that gave Double R a bad review. And obviously Norma's hurt by it anyway, you know, that her restaurant got a bad review. And then to find out that it was her mom that wrote the bad review, then she's really upset and basically like, you know, just get out of here, you know, that type of thing. But then we see Hank with her, you know, her new stepdad, Ernie, that they knew each other from prison. They're like in hunting gear, but they're at One-Eyed Jack's, and they're meeting with Jean. And so they're in something with him, you know, in some kind of business with him. And then who else shows up but the same Mountie that we saw show up with the FBI agent to suspend Coop. So that guy's dirty and involved in this like whole drug thing. Then we get a scene of Josie showing up at Harry's in the middle of the night, and you know she's worried and scared and upset and everything like that. We see Coop still goes on his night fishing trip with Major Briggs. You know, that was going to be the last thing he was going to do before he left, but you know, now he's suspended, so he's not really going anywhere at this point because of the investigation. But they're out in the woods, and then Coop gets up to go pee, and while that's happening, this bright light and noise happens, and then he comes back and Major Briggs is gone. So he just disappears. We get a scene of James on his motorcycle leaving town, and then we get they're talking to Betty Briggs, you know, Bobby's mom, Major Briggs' wife, and she's like, you know, he's disappeared before. You know, it's usually has something to do with his work. You know, where were you guys? You were in the woods. Okay, that's significant. And, you know, all that type of stuff, you know, kind of not super helpful, but, you know, she's kind of just like, you know, this happened before. He'll be back. It's probably something to do with his work, and we're not supposed to know about it. You know, that type of thing. Then at the high school, we see Nadine come up to Donna, and she's like, "Hey, are you still dating Mike?" And she's like, "No, why?" And she's like, "Well, I kind of like him. I think he's cute, that type of thing." And Donna's like, "Well, what about Ed?" And she's like, "Well, he doesn't really like going out, and that type of thing." So she still kind of sees Ed as a friend, even though they're probably like necking or something, as she put it, at the house. But and she also thinks that they're at her house and staying together while her parents are in Europe, is what she thinks. I don't know if her parents are dead, that's just why they're not there. But yeah, like Donna basically is like gives her permission. So it's like, yeah, like I'm not with them. So go do what you got to do. Just don't hurt Ed, that type of thing. And then also asks about James, but she's just like, "Oh, Ed's friend? Yeah, I don't know. He left, that type of thing." So then James pulls into some roadside bar. There's like two other people in there, and there's a woman sitting at the bar, and he starts talking to her name's Evelyn. Eventually she like brings up like, "Hey, I got this old car and I want to get it fixed, because I did something to it, and it's my husband's car, and I want to fix before he gets home," that type of thing. So he agrees to help her out with that. And back at the station arrives another FBI agent that's going to help Coop, kind of help represent him from his side. And he's like, "Oh, you're going to love Dennis. Like he's a great agent." And then in comes David Duchovny in drag, and, "Oh, by the way, I go by Denise now," that type of thing. And everyone's like a little thrown off, especially in 1990, but also for 1990, everyone's surprisingly very cool with it. Everyone's got their questions and is like, "Hey, that's kind of weird," but then it could be so much worse. Just look at Ace Ventura: Pet Detective. Then we get a scene back at the high school of Nadine's in the gym working out next to Mike and trying to flirt with him, and she's pushing crazy weight, and the wrestling coach is like, "Hey, would you be interested in joining the wrestling team?" And she's like, "Yeah, let's do it." We see Hank quit working for Ben, and Ben's like, "You can't do that." He's like, "Oh, actually, I'm working for Jean, and he's taking over One Eye Jacks," that type of thing. Like, we're pushing you out. Like, so I don't know why you're threatening me, because I'm on the winning team, that type of thing. We see Coop get a tape from Wyndham Earl, his former partner who went crazy and disappeared. Then we see the mayor's brother, Dougie, getting married to a very young woman. He's like, I don't know if that's what he's actually supposed to be, but they jokingly say that he's like over 100 and she's 19 or something like that. So, they're getting married, and then obviously I think the brother, the mayor, like tries to object, and they're like, that you don't have a good reason other than being mad at your brother. And we see Josie and Catherine talking to each other. At some point, Catherine does like reveal to Sheriff Truman. She's like, "Hey, I was lost in the woods. I thought someone was trying to kill me, and I hid in this like old cabin that my parents used to have, and there was food there, so I stayed there until I ran out of food. And then at that point I felt safe, and so I came back." So her and Josie are talking, and she's like, tells Josie, is like, "I know you were part of this, so I'm going to punish you by now you have to, either I can turn you in and let the law enforcement know of your involvement in this, or you can be my maid, basically, and work for me." So she's going to exploit Josie as revenge. And so Josie walks out of the room, and then in comes Josie's dead husband, Andrew, who is still alive. So it's Catherine and her brother. It's some kind of big major long con that they've been working on. So that's it for the first half of season 2. That covers 11 episodes and everything that aired in 1990. So when we get to the next, like when it starts back up in January or whatever, they take off the holidays, and then so I should be able to get through all of those in one episode, and it'll probably be a shorter episode because there's way more filler in the second half. But I will say it does pick up in the last couple episodes. So it's not like it's all bad from here on out, but it like there's a big chunk, and at least we took 2 episodes out of it already. So yeah, I think that about covers it. I don't think I have too much else to say. If I remember something that I forgot to say, I'll add it to the next episode. But yeah, hopefully that was informative. I think I got everything major to talk about. I definitely missed less stuff than I did on the last episode. So hopefully that was at least entertaining and interesting. Thank you guys for listening / watching, and see you guys again next week. Thanks. Bye.